In this video, we're going to explore how Doha transformed from a modest Gulf capital into a fully engineered modern city. We'll break down how the roads were laid, how the power grids expanded, how water systems were built, and how thousands of workers reshaped the skyline between the 1980s, the 1990s, and the early 2000s. If you're interested in how cities are actually built, not just designed, but physically constructed, make sure to subscribe for more deep urban history. Long a sleepy pearling and fishing village, Doha had about 350 pearling boats at the beginning of the 20th century. The development of Japanese cultured pearls and the worldwide economic depression of the 1930s severely affected the town. The development of Qatar's considerable oil reserves after World War II, however, led to a complete economic transformation. Qatar became an extremely prosperous country with a high per capita income and undertook the thorough modernization of its capital. Old slum sections were razed, and modern commercial and residential quarters were built. Doha's water supply is obtained by distilling seawater. The deepwater port accommodates ocean-going vessels. The Qatar National Fishing Company, using modern motorized craft, is headquartered at the port, where a modern shrimp packing plant also has been built. In early 1820, the settlement was the only active port in the peninsula from which trading vessels regularly sailed. It had become an important commercial point in the region. Around that same time, a maritime peace treaty was signed between a powerful trading company and several coastal rulers. The agreement aimed to regulate conduct at sea and reduce conflict. However, the peninsula's leadership was not a signatory to this treaty. As a result, its port was not formally bound by the terms, nor was it instructed to adopt the maritime symbols required under the agreement. The settlement drew attention again in 1821, when one of the company's armed vessels bombarded and destroyed the town. The attack was carried out as punishment for what was considered a violation of maritime peace. Whether the local inhabitants had agreed to such terms, or even fully understood the accusation, was not taken into account. The attacking authority regarded itself as the enforcer and protector of those who claimed to have suffered from the alleged breach. The bombardment forced several hundred residents to abandon their homes. Many sought temporary refuge on nearby offshore islands until the immediate threat had passed. The turn of the 21st century redefined Doha entirely. Natural gas wealth intensified state capacity. Architecture became strategic, symbolic, internationally competitive. West Bay transformed into a dense cluster of skyscrapers. Towers adopted varied silhouettes, cylindrical forms, tapered crowns, Islamic geometric motifs embedded into glass facades. The skyline became expressive rather than purely functional. The Doha Corniche evolved into a civic spine. Landscaped promenades curved around the bay. Government ministries, cultural institutions, and luxury hotels framed the waterfront. The sea was no longer merely a resource. It became a visual centerpiece. Construction during the 1980s relied heavily on reinforced concrete. The climate demanded durability. High salinity in the air required protective coatings. Steel rebar was treated carefully to resist corrosion. Cement mixes were adjusted for heat. Builders had to account for extreme summer temperatures that could affect curing times and structural integrity. Construction schedules often shifted around seasonal heat. Local stone was still used in certain facades, but concrete became dominant. Sand from the desert, once just part of the landscape, became a core construction material. Imported aggregates and steel increased as projects scaled up. Prefabricated elements slowly entered the scene, especially in larger government and commercial developments. The workforce behind this expansion was largely international. Engineers, architects, and planners arrived from abroad. Skilled masons, welders, carpenters, and electricians worked long shifts to meet tight deadlines. Construction sites became common throughout Doha. Cranes began punctuating the skyline. Temporary scaffolding surrounded nearly every growing district. Road infrastructure was one of the most significant transformations of the 1980s and 1990s. Asphalt highways replaced narrower, older roads. Multi-lane corridors connected residential zones with industrial areas. Roundabouts were implemented widely to manage traffic flow before large-scale signalized intersections became common. Road lighting systems expanded. Drainage systems were installed to handle rare but intense rainfalls. Electricity networks expanded rapidly during this period. Substations were built across the city to distribute power reliably. Underground cabling gradually replaced overhead lines in many districts. Air conditioning became universal, shifting buildings away from passive cooling reliance. Energy demand rose sharply, and generation capacity had to scale with urban growth. Water infrastructure required even more strategic planning. Desalination plants along the coast supplied potable water. Pipelines carried treated water inland. Storage reservoirs were constructed to maintain pressure and supply consistency. Sewage networks were expanded and modernized, replacing older septic systems in many neighborhoods. Wastewater treatment plants grew in capacity, reflecting population increase. The fire and emergency response system evolved alongside physical growth. Fire stations were distributed more strategically across expanding districts. Equipment modernized. High-rise firefighting capabilities were developed as building heights increased. Safety codes tightened gradually during the 1990s, particularly concerning electrical systems, emergency exits, and fire suppression measures. Civil defense regulations became more structured as urban density increased. Telecommunications infrastructure also expanded dramatically. Telephone lines became more widespread in the 1980s. By the 1990s, fiber optic systems began appearing in core districts. Communication networks became essential to business and governance. Infrastructure planning increasingly included conduits for future expansion rather than short-term solutions. In residential construction, the 1980s favored low-rise concrete homes with flat roofs and internal courtyards. By the 1990s, villa compounds expanded outward into newly developed land parcels. Blockwork masonry filled with reinforced columns became standard. External insulation improved slowly over time as awareness of energy efficiency increased. Urban planning around these sites included metro expansions, road networks, and entirely new districts. Lusail City rose north of Doha as a master-planned urban extension. One of the most defining architectural moments came with the Museum of Islamic Art, designed by I.M. Pei. Positioned on an artificial island extending into the bay, the museum introduced minimalist geometry inspired by classical Islamic forms. Its pale limestone exterior glows against desert light. It does not compete with skyscrapers. It commands quiet authority. Culture became architecture's new frontier. Education City expanded westward, hosting international university campuses within carefully master-planned environments. Buildings blended contemporary design with regional motifs. Shade structures, arcades, open courtyards, academic architecture reshaped Doha's inland geography. The city no longer grew solely along the coast. It pushed into the desert with intentional zoning. Infrastructure deepened alongside aesthetics. The Hamad International Airport emerged as a monumental gateway. Wide-span steel roofs, vast interior halls, sculptural installations. Aviation architecture reinforced Doha's role as a global transit hub. Movement became identity. The 2022 FIFA World Cup accelerated another wave of construction. Stadiums were designed as architectural statements rather than simple arenas.